Welcome back to Drowsy History. Get comfortable, dim the lights, let your shoulders drop away from your ears, and let the day you've just finished start to loosen its grip on you. There's nothing left tonight that needs solving, nothing that needs deciding. All you have to do is lie still and listen while the centuries fold quietly backward and a mountain valley on the far side of the world comes slowly into view through the fog. If these long, slow histories help you fall asleep, it would mean a great deal if you subscribed. It's free, it takes a second, and it's the single thing that helps this channel keep making them. And before you drift off, I'd love to know something. What's the oldest story your family still tells? Not a famous one, a small one, the kind that gets repeated at kitchen tables and passed down slightly wrong each time until nobody's quite sure which parts really happened. Leave it in the comments. And if your family isn't a storytelling family, just tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight, and I'll picture you there. Tonight, we're going somewhere you think you already know. You've seen it 1,000 times. A figure in black on a moonlit roof, a mask with only the eyes showing, a blade held backward along the forearm, a spinning star hurled through the dark, a silent drop into a lord's chamber. The whole image arrives fully formed because it's been sold to you since childhood in films and cartoons and video games and the covers of paperback novels. Almost none of it is true, not exaggerated, not embellished, simply not true in the way that a costume is not a person. The figure in black on the roof is a piece of theater, and we're going to trace exactly where that costume came from and why it stuck. But underneath the costume, there was a real occupation practiced by real people in real villages that you could still walk to today, and their working lives were stranger and quieter and far more human than the myth ever allowed. They did not call themselves ninja. That reading of the characters came later and became fixed largely because of how the word traveled westward in the 20th century. In their own time and their own mouths, they were shinobi, the ones who endure, the ones who conceal, the ones who bear it. The word carries patience in it. It carries waiting. And waiting, as you'll discover tonight, was the overwhelming substance of the job. So set aside the black suit. Set aside the throwing stars. Set aside the idea that this was a life of constant, breathless violence, because the truth is that a shinobi who fought had already failed and knew it, and would spend the rest of his life being reminded of it by men who paid him not to be noticed. Instead, imagine a valley. It sits in the mountains of what is now Mie Prefecture, in the middle of the main island of Japan, ringed on every side by wooded ridges that turn blue at dusk. The basin floor is flat and green and stitched with rice paddies. Streams come down out of the hills and are patiently persuaded into channels. In the autumn, the whole valley fills with fog so thick that the villages disappear from one another, and a man walking a familiar path can lose the world entirely at arm's length, and find it again 100 steps later, exactly where he left it. This is Iga. Over the ridge to the north, in a separate fold of the same mountains, lies Kōka, a district of narrow valleys and scattered hamlets that shares Iga's history so closely the two are almost always spoken of together, the way twins are. These two places produce the shinobi, not a secret order, not a mystical brotherhood handed down from Chinese sages or mountain demons, whatever the later stories claimed. Two ordinary rural districts full of ordinary rural families who happened to be positioned in a particular way at a particular moment in Japanese history, and who turned that position into a trade. Tonight, you're going to live one of their days, all of it. The cold start before dawn, the mud, the crops, the long, boring hours of a job that was mostly agriculture, the clothes you actually put on, the tools you actually carried, which were closer to a locksmith's kit than a weapons rack, the disguises, the waiting, the listening, the terrible patience of a man standing in the same spot for 6 hours because something might happen and probably won't, and he has to be there in case it does. You'll learn what you were actually paid for, and it wasn't killing. You'll learn what happened when a night went wrong, and why running was the correct answer, and why nobody was ashamed of it. You'll learn what your wife did while you were gone, and what your neighbors knew, and what they pretended not to. And at the very end, when the wars finally stopped and the country settled into 2.5 centuries of peace, you'll learn what happened to men whose entire profession depended on a world at war, and what one of them did about it, sitting at a desk with an inkstone, trying to write everything down before it vanished. It's a quieter story than the one you were sold, but I think it's a better one. The valley is dark. It's an hour or so before dawn, sometime in the middle of the 16th century, and the fog is sitting low over the paddies, like something breathing. Somewhere a dog is complaining about nothing. The mountains are still black against a sky that hasn't decided to be blue yet. You're already awake, not because anyone woke you, because you always are at this hour, the way a body eventually learns a shape and keeps it. Let your breathing slow. Let the bed take your weight completely. And let's begin. To understand why you exist, why this trade exists at all in these two valleys and almost nowhere else, you have to understand what's happened to your country. Japan in your lifetime has no functioning center. There's an emperor in Kyoto, treated with enormous ceremonial respect and possessing almost no power at all. There is a shogun, also in Kyoto, who in theory rules on the emperor's behalf and in practice controls a shrinking handful of streets. And beyond that, there is nothing holding the country together. The provinces have come loose, one by one, like teeth. What fills the gap is warlords, regional strongmen, each with an army, each with a province or two or five, each spending his entire adult life either attacking a neighbor or preparing to be attacked by one. Historians will later call this the age of the country at war. From inside it, it doesn't feel like an age. It feels like weather. And here's the thing about warlords. They need land, flat, fertile, taxable land, close to roads, close to rivers, close to ports, land that can be measured and assessed and squeezed. Look around your valley. Iga is a mountain basin. It is not on the way to anywhere. The roads in are narrow and steep and easy to block. The rice yield is real, but unspectacular. There is no great port, no great city, no great temple complex worth conquering for the prestige alone. To a warlord with an army to feed and a rival to crush, Iga is a great deal of trouble for a modest reward, and the arithmetic simply never quite works out. So nobody comes. For generation after generation, nobody comes. And in that gap, something unusual grows. In most of Japan, the structure is simple and vertical. A great lord at the top, Beneath him, retainers holding land in his name. Beneath them, the farmers who work it. Loyalty flows upward, orders flow downward, and everybody knows where they stand because somebody with a very large sword told them. Iga has no great lord. What Iga has instead is roughly a few hundred small landholding families scattered across the basin and the hills around it. Families who farm and who also fight and who hold their own little patches directly rather than at anyone's pleasure. You are one of them. Your holding is not large. Your house sits behind an earthwork bank and a ditch, with a bamboo thicket planted along the top of the bank because bamboo grows fast and is miserable to push through. Perhaps there's a wooden watchtower, more platform than tower, tall enough to see the next valley's smoke. The archaeologists who eventually go looking for these will be astonished by how many there are. Hundreds of them. Not castles in any grand sense, no white keeps, no stone ramparts, just hundreds of fortified farmhouses packed into one small basin, each one belonging to a family who was quietly prepared for the possibility that their neighbors might need reminding of something. Because you did fight each other, constantly. Water rights, boundary stones, a marriage that went wrong, a debt, an insult at a festival. Small wars endlessly between families who had known each other for 200 years and would go on knowing each other for 200 more. And that, more than anything else, is the accidental training program. You grow up in a place where the raid is a normal fact of life, where a strong young man is expected to know how to cross unfamiliar ground at night, how to get over an earth bank quietly, how to tell whether a household is awake, how to read the state of a neighbor's stores from the height of his woodpile. You grow up knowing that a fight you win by surprise costs you nothing, and a fight you win by force costs you a cousin. You learn the economics of that before you learn to write. At some point, the families of the valley do something remarkable. They stop pretending that anyone is in charge, and they organize the absence. They form a leagues. Representatives from the landholding families meet and argue and agree on rules for the valley, how disputes will be handled, what happens when one family is wronged by another, and crucially, what everyone is obliged to do if an outsider, ever comes over the mountains with an army. The obligations are written down. Every household able to bear arms is expected to turn out. The old and the very young are to be moved to the temples. Nobody is to make a private arrangement with the invader. It is not a democracy, and you shouldn't romanticize it. The families who sat at that table were the ones who owned things. The people who actually cut the rice mostly did not get a vote. But it is, genuinely, an unusual thing. A rural district in the middle of a warlord's century, governing itself by committee with a written agreement and a standing mutual defense clause, in a country where almost everywhere else the answer to who decides was simply whoever has the most men. Over the ridge in Kōka, something similar takes shape. A council of local families, an agreement, a habit of collective decision. Two valleys, two leagues, endless intermarriage between them, and a shared reputation that begins to travel. Because the other thing that happens in a place with no lord to serve is that your skills become available for hire. If you are a young man in Owari or Mikawa or Omi, born to a warrior family, your fighting belongs to somebody. It's promised. You inherit an obligation along with your father's armor, and you do not sell your sword arm on the open market because it isn't yours to sell. You are a young man in Iga. Nobody owns your fighting. There is no lord standing over you with a claim on your loyalty, no ancestral debt, no oath sworn by a grandfather. Your obligations run sideways to the valley and its league, not upward, which means that when a warlord 3 provinces away finds himself needing something delicate done, needing to know the true state of a rival's granaries, needing a gate opened from the inside, needing a message carried through country where his own banners would be recognized and killed. He can send a discreet man with money into the mountains, and the mountains will send someone back. That's the trade. That's what your valley sells. Not magic, not assassination mostly. Access, information, and the willingness to walk into somewhere you are not supposed to be, provided by the only people in Japan who are both skilled enough to do it and unattached enough to be for sale. Now, it's still dark, and none of that pays for itself. There's work to do. Here is the first thing that will disappoint the films. You are a farmer, not a farmer as a cover story, not a farmer the way a spy in a later century might take a job at a bank in order to have somewhere to be seen going. A farmer in the plain and total sense. Your family's survival comes out of the ground. Most of your waking hours across most of the year are spent making that happen, and the shinobi work is the thing you do occasionally, in the gaps, when someone pays for it. Think of it the way you might think of a person today who fishes commercially for 4 months and does something else entirely for the other 8. The dramatic part is real. It is simply not most of the calendar, so you get up in the dark, and the first thing you do is check the sky. You do this every morning of your life, and you do it without thinking, the way you'd check a clock, cloud shape, wind direction, and whether it's changed overnight, whether the fog is sitting still or moving, whether the air has that particular flatness that means rain by afternoon. You are not being mystical. You are a man whose year depends on water arriving at the right time in the right quantity, and who has been reading the sky since he could walk. It will turn out to be one of the more useful skills you own. Not because weather reading is a secret art, but because a man who can look at a sky and know how much light he'll have in 6 hours, and whether the ground will be soft or hard when he crosses it, and whether sound will carry or be smothered, that man plans better than one who can't. The old manuals will devote page after page to weather and moon phase and season, and readers centuries later will assume it's occult. It isn't. It's farming knowledge, pointed sideways. The house is cold. There's a hearth set into the floor, a square pit with ash banked over the embers from last night, and someone, probably you, since you're up, coaxes it back into a small red life and hangs the pot. Smoke drifts up and finds the gaps in the thatch. The whole house smells permanently of that smoke, and so do you, and so does every garment you own, and you have never once noticed it, because you have smelled of it since birth. Breakfast is not rice. This is worth sitting with for a moment, because it's one of those details that quietly rearranges everything. You grow rice. Your patties are full of it. Rice is the currency of your country. Taxes are assessed in it. A lord's wealth is counted in it. A warrior's stipend is paid in it, which is precisely why you don't eat much of it. The good rice goes out to obligations, to trade, to the collective stores. What you eat is barley, millet, buckwheat, whatever grain is cheapest and most abundant, usually boiled together with a small amount of rice to make it feel like a meal. There's miso. There are pickles in enormous quantity because pickling is how a mountain valley survives February. There might be a little dried fish hauled up from the coast by peddlers, expensive enough that it's an event. You eat quickly with your family around the hearth in the near dark. Nobody talks much. There's no reason to. Then you go out into the cold and you work. What that work is depends entirely on where the year has got to, and your body knows the answer before your mind does. In late winter, you're repairing tools, thatch, the bank around the property, the channels that carry water down from the hills, all of which spent the autumn silting up and the winter freezing and cracking. There's charcoal to burn in the hills, there's firewood, there's rope to be made, and there is always, always rope to be made from straw and hemp and bark, hour after hour of twisting fiber while you talk about nothing. In spring, the whole valley turns to the paddies, and the work becomes brutal and communal, flooding the fields, turning the mud, leveling it until it lies flat enough that the water sits evenly across the whole surface because rice is fussy and unequal water means unequal grain. Then the planting, bent double, calf deep, moving backwards across a field of gray soup, pushing seedlings into the mud in rows for days, alongside everyone you have ever known. In summer, it's weeding and water. Weeding is endless and thankless and done on your hands. Water is politics. The streams come down from the hills and are divided between families according to arrangements older than anyone living. And in a dry year, those arrangements are tested, and tested arrangements are how feuds start. More than one small war in your valley began with a man quietly widening a channel at night. Autumn is the harvest, and the harvest is everything: cutting, bundling, hanging the sheaves to dry on racks, threshing, hulling, storing. Weeks of it, and then the assessment and the portions that go out, and the arithmetic of whether what's left will last until spring, an arithmetic every family in the valley does out loud, repeatedly, with increasing precision, until the answer is known. This is your life. Genuinely, statistically, this is your life. If you added up your hours across a decade, the overwhelming majority of them are spent in mud and grain and rope and smoke, indistinguishable from any other farming family in any other mountain valley in Japan. And then, perhaps 2 or 3 times a year, perhaps less, a man comes up the road with a proposal. The requests arrive in the quiet parts of the calendar, and that isn't an accident either. Warlords campaign when the roads are passable and the harvest is in, and they want their information gathered in the weeks before that, which is also, conveniently, when a farming valley has men to spare. So the seasons of war and the seasons of rice fit together like two hands, and you have spent your whole life in the gaps between them, which is a strange place to live, and which is exactly why the work suits you. The sky is graying now. Out in the paddies, the fog is beginning to lift off the water in slow sheets. There's a man coming up the road. Before we follow that man up the road, let's deal with the black suit, because it's sitting in your mind right now, and it will keep interrupting until we take it apart. You do not own one. Nobody in your valley owns one. Nobody in your valley has ever seen one. If you described it to your neighbors, the hood, the mask leaving only the eyes, the fitted black tunic and trousers, the split toed boots, all matched, all in one color, worn as a uniform, they would look at you with real confusion, because the single most conspicuous thing a person could possibly do in your world is dress in a matching outfit that resembles no ordinary garment. Your job is to be unremarkable. The costume is the opposite of the job. So, where does it come from? It comes from a stage. Roughly a century after your time, when the wars have stopped and the country is at peace, a form of popular theater becomes wildly successful in the cities. Kabuki. Big, loud, spectacular theater with elaborate scene changes and props that need moving mid performance and actors who need to vanish suddenly through trapdoors. To manage all that, the theaters use stagehands who work in full view of the audience. And because they need to be visible enough to do their jobs, but not part of the story, they are dressed head to foot in plain black, a hood, a covered face, dark robes. The convention is agreed between stage and audience. Black means not here. The eye is trained to slide past. Everyone in the theater can see the man in black perfectly well, and everyone has decided not to. Now think like a playwright. You want a shinobi to appear from nowhere and strike, and the audience must gasp. The most elegant trick in the building is already standing on your stage. Put your assassin in the stagehand's black. The audience's eye has been trained for years to ignore that shape. He stands in plain sight, unnoticed for whole minutes, and then he moves, and the shock is enormous because a piece of the furniture has just come alive. It's brilliant theater, and it is entirely a theatrical device, a joke about the audience's own habits, played on a lit stage in a peaceful city, generations after the last real shinobi did the last real job. But it's such a good image that it escapes. It moves from the stage into woodblock prints, because prints sell what audiences already love. From prints into illustrated books, from illustrated books into the popular fiction of the 19th century, and then into early film, which needed instantly readable villains and heroes and found one ready made. And from film into everything. By the 20th century, the costume has become so completely fused with the idea that the two cannot be separated, and people all over the world now know, with total confidence, exactly what a shinobi wore, which is a stage crew's uniform from a comedy about scene changes. So, what do you actually wear? You wear what everyone wears. That's the whole answer, and it's more interesting than it sounds. Ordinary working clothes for a rural man of your standing. A short kimono style jacket, worn wrapped and belted, cut to sit above the knee so it doesn't foul your legs in the paddy. Loose trousers or leg wrappings gathered and tied at the calf. Straw sandals, or when you can get them, cloth soled footwear that grips and is quiet, split at the big toe. A length of cloth about a meter long, tucked in your belt. A hand towel, a headband, a bandage, a sling, a bag, a filter, a mask, a rope in an emergency. In the fields, a wide woven hat. Color is where it gets slightly more interesting. Most working cloth in your world is undyed hemp, which is a grayish, strawish, dirtish color, or it's dyed with indigo, which is the workhorse dye of Japan, and produces every shade from pale blue-gray through to a navy so deep it reads almost black in low light. That dark indigo is what you'd wear at night, not because it's a special uniform, because it's the darkest cloth an ordinary man plausibly owns, and there is no such thing as pure black in a village wardrobe. And there's a practical reason to prefer it over true black, which you know without ever having tested it against anything else. Under a moon, black is too absolute. A true black shape moving across a gray lit field is a hole in the world, and the eye catches holes. A very dark blue in the same light is just a piece of the shadow that happens to be closer. Deep indigo is nearer the color of night than black ever is. There are other things people will later say about indigo, that it kept insects off, that it did something for the skin, that it made cloth last longer. Some of that may be true, and some of it is village wisdom. Either way, you don't wear it for those reasons. You wear it because it's what's in the chest. And when you actually go to work, most of the time you won't wear dark clothes at all, because most of the time you won't be sneaking anywhere. You'll be walking up to a gate in daylight, dressed as exactly the sort of person who walks up to gates in daylight and being let through. The black suit says, I am here to do something forbidden, and I have dressed for it. Your clothes say, I am nobody. Look at the next man. Only one of those is a professional garment. The man on the road is closer now. He's dressed like a merchant, which almost certainly means he isn't one. The conversation with the merchant, who is not a merchant, takes place in the main room, over tea, with the door open so that anyone passing sees two men talking about nothing in particular. It is unhurried, it is almost entirely indirect, and when he leaves, an hour later, you have agreed to travel some distance to a province you have visited twice to find out three specific things and to be back within the month. We'll come to what those three things are. First, let's pack, because what you put in that bag is one of the great quiet corrections to everything you think you know. There's a list. Later, much later, when a man of your profession sits down to write everything out before it's lost, he will record what he calls the essential six, the tools a shinobi carries, and beyond which everything else is situational. When people finally read that list in the modern age, a great many of them will be disappointed because there is not a single weapon on it. Here it is. First, a woven hat, broad, conical, made of rush or bamboo, the sort worn by half the travelers on any road in Japan. It shades you. It sheds rain, and worn at the correct angle, it removes your face from the world. Not dramatically, you're not hiding, but a man under a wide hat, walking, is a shape and a pair of feet, and nothing more. Somebody could pass you daily for a week and be unable to say what you looked like. It costs almost nothing, and it is arguably the most powerful item you own. Second, a rope with a hook, a grappling hook in plain terms, though yours is a modest thing, a few iron prongs, a good length of hemp line, coiled tight and carried against the body. It gets you over a wall. It gets you down a wall, which matters more, because coming down in a hurry is when people break ankles, and ankles end careers. It bridges a ditch. It lowers a bundle. It ties a gate shut behind you so that the men chasing you have to solve a knot in the dark, and knots in the dark take a wonderfully long time. Third, a writing implement, something that makes a mark, a stub of soft stone, chalk, charcoal, carried always. Stop and look at that one, because it tells you what the job is. The third most essential item in the professional kit is a pencil, not a blade, not a poison. A pencil because you are being paid to bring back information, and information that is only in your head is information that can be lost to a blow, a fever, a bad night, or the simple ordinary failure of a tired mind. You make notes, you sketch, you mark a wall so a man following you tomorrow knows which turning you took. Fourth, medicine, a small bundle of it, and this one is genuinely a matter of life and death. You are going to be days from anyone who cares whether you live. You will drink bad water. You will sleep outdoors in weather that will try to take your chest. You will cut yourself on something rusty. Every practitioner of your trade carries remedies, and many families guard their recipes closely, and it is not remotely accidental that when peace finally comes to Japan, a striking number of families from your valley and from Koka over the ridge will make a comfortable living selling patent medicines. They had the knowledge already. They just stopped needing it themselves. Fifth, that length of cloth again, the 3 foot towel, head covering, mask, bandage, sling, strainer, sack, belt, rope, blindfold for a frightened horse, padding under a rope so it doesn't sing against stone. There is almost no problem in your working life that this cloth does not partially solve, and a man who lost his would replace it before nightfall. Sixth, fire, a means of carrying it and a means of making it. Traditionally, a hollowed length of bamboo, holding a smoldering cord, sealed so it neither goes out nor shows. Fire is heat when you're hypothermic. It's a signal. It's a lit lamp when you finally get somewhere. You can read your own notes. That's the kit. A hat, a rope, a pencil, some medicine, a cloth, and a coal. Notice what it resembles. It is not the equipment of an assassin. It is the equipment of a man who intends to travel a long way, sleep rough, get in somewhere, look at things, write them down, get out, and survive the journey home. It's closer to what a surveyor would carry, or a smuggler, or a very careful peddler. Beyond the six, you take what the job requires and no more, because weight is the enemy and anything unusual on your person is a question you'd have to answer at a checkpoint. A short digging and prying tool, a flat iron blade with a socket for a handle, used for levering, chiseling, scraping mortar, making a hole in a mud wall, digging a hasty pit. This is a hand tool. Later generations will decide it was a throwing knife and put it in the hands of every fictional ninja alive, and this remains one of the great misunderstandings of the trade. An item for quietly removing part of a wall reclassified as a weapon because it happened to be pointed. A small saw with a hard, narrow blade for cutting through a bar or a shutter slat, slowly, wrapped in cloth to kill the noise, over the course of a very long hour. A tube for listening or for breathing. A folding pole. Floats and inflated skins if there's serious water involved. Simple pins and probes for a door bolt, because most doors in your country are wood and paper and are held by a bar you can lift if you can reach it. And reaching it is a problem of geometry, not force. And weapons? Yes, of course. A short sword, generally, because a man traveling armed is normal, and a man traveling unarmed is a curiosity. Perhaps a knife. But you carry them the way a sailor carries a knife, as a tool with an unpleasant last use. The throwing stars people imagine, small, sharp, thrown to wound, did exist in Japan. They belonged to martial traditions broadly and were never the emblem of your profession that later centuries made them. A thrown blade is a blade you no longer have, thrown by a man who has just revealed exactly where he is standing. That is not how you would like your evening to go. Your bag packed weighs very little. You could carry it all day and forget it was there. That's rather the point. You leave 2 days later on foot before light. And here is the second great correction, the one that undoes the roofs and the shadows. Most of your work is done in daylight, in public, in front of people, while they look directly at you. Your trade divides into two halves. There is the hidden way, going in unseen at night over a wall, through a gap, relying on darkness and silence and the fact that nobody is looking. And there is the open way, walking in through the front, in daylight as somebody else entirely, relying on the fact that everybody is looking and none of them see anything worth remarking on. The open way is the senior discipline. It is harder, it is slower, it requires more of you as a person, and it produces far better results because a man who has been inside a compound for 6 days as a hired laborer knows things that a man on a roof for 6 minutes can only guess at. The hidden way is what you do when the open way has failed or isn't available. Rooftops are a last resort. They are, in a real sense, an admission that the clever approach didn't work, so you become someone else. And the tradition your valley has developed is not about masks and false beards, it's about roles. There is a recognized set of them, 7 in the usual telling, chosen for one shared quality. Each is a kind of person who can move around the country without anyone finding it strange. Think about how rare that is. In your world, most people die within a day's walk of where they were born. A stranger in a village is an event. Someone will ask. Someone will remember. Unless the stranger belongs to one of a small number of categories that are permitted to wander. So, the mendicant monk with the flute, a wandering ascetic who plays a bamboo pipe for alms and wears a deep basket-shaped hat of woven straw that covers the entire head, face included. This is the most notorious of the roles for obvious reasons. A man is permitted, expected, required to have his face fully hidden and to walk anywhere and to stand outside a building for an hour playing and to accept a coin and move on. It is a costume that makes invisibility a religious observance. You will not use it often. It draws a particular kind of attention, and there are real practitioners who will spot a fraud in 3 notes. But it exists, and it works. The ordinary monk, robed, shaven, traveling between temples on temple business, which is constant and unremarkable. Monks eat at strangers' houses. Monks are given lodging. Monks are told things because people tell monks things. Grief, gossip, complaints about the local lord's new levy. A monk can ask questions that would get a merchant beaten. The mountain ascetic, the wild-haired holy man who lives on the peaks and comes down periodically, half priest and half something older, who deals in charms and cures and prayers over sick children. Rural people are frightened of these men and generous to them. They go where they like. The merchant, the most useful of all. A merchant has an obvious reason to be near a castle town, to count things, to ask about the price of rice, to comment on the state of the roads, to notice that the garrison has been buying an unusual amount of salt fish. Nothing a merchant does is suspicious because everything a merchant does is business. The traveling performer and the street entertainer, jugglers, storytellers, drummers, players of small comic pieces. They arrive, they draw a crowd, they take coins, they sleep in a barn, they leave. And while the crowd watches the performance, one of the troupe is watching the crowd. Who came out? How many men of fighting age are in the town? Whether they look fed? And the seventh, which is the best of all and the one you'll use today, the ordinary person, the nobody, a farmer walking to the next district about a family matter, a day laborer looking for work, a man carrying a bundle who is exactly what he appears to be. This is the hardest role because there is nothing to hide behind, no hat, no robe, no drum, just you being unremarkable all day without a single false note. And the false notes are all in the small things. Your hands must match your story. A man who claims to be a laborer and has soft palms is finished, and it will be a woman at a well who notices, not a guard. Your accent must be plausible, which is why you work certain provinces and not others, and why you learn a district's speech before you go, and why the manuals will insist so heavily on knowing local dialect. Your walk must be right. A man carrying a heavy load walks a particular way, and if your bundle is light and you walk as though it's heavy, or the reverse, an experienced eye catches it. You must know what your supposed trade actually involves. If you say you're a dyer and someone's cousin is a dyer, you will be asked a technical question in a friendly voice, and there is no recovering from a wrong answer. Above all, you must be boring. The instinct of the amateur is to build a story, a colorful past, a reason to be here, a small tragedy that explains everything. Never do this. An interesting stranger is remembered and discussed. Give people almost nothing, a shrug, a mumble, a dull answer, a reference to an errand too tedious to explain, and they will fill the silence themselves, decide you're some fellow from over the hill, and forget you before evening. The real skill of your profession is not physical, it's the ability to be looked at and produce no impression whatsoever. There's a thing the manuals will say in various forms that gets at it better than any description of technique. The best concealment is a place in other people's expectations. Stand where you are supposed to stand, do what such a man is supposed to do, and you will not need a shadow. It's an odd craft to be good at. It requires you to spend long stretches of your life being nobody, on purpose, to make yourself so successfully unremarkable that if the job goes perfectly, no one will ever know you were there at all. No story will be told about you. Your greatest professional triumphs will be by definition entirely invisible. You're walking east now, in a wide hat, in ordinary clothes, on a road with a dozen other travelers. Not one of them will remember your face. It takes you 5 days to get where you're going, 5 days of walking. This is worth dwelling on because the films skip it entirely, and it is, in terms of hours, the bulk of your professional life. You are not deployed anywhere. You walk, you cross river fords and pay ferrymen, and sleep in the corner of a barn for a coin, or in a temple's outbuilding, or, when the weather permits, under a tree with your bag as a pillow and your hat over your face. You eat badly. You carry hard, dry provisions, rice cooked and dried until it's stone, which you soak or simply gnaw as you go, and which tastes of very little. There are compressed cakes of ground grain and beans and whatever sweetener can be had, made to be dense and portable and to keep for a long time in a pouch. They aren't the miraculous pills of legend. They're field rations, and like all field rations in all centuries, they're dull and they work. Along the way, you are already collecting. This is the part that never appears in any story, and it's the actual craft. You have been gathering usable information since the moment you left your valley, and you'll keep gathering all the way home. The state of the road, whether it's been widened, whether the ruts are deep and fresh, which means carts, which means supply, whether the bridges have been repaired recently, and by whom, how many travelers are on the road, and what kind, whether the ferrymen have been told to note who crosses, whether there are new checkpoints, and how carefully they're manned, and whether the men manning them look bored or nervous, because bored is a garrison at peace, and nervous is a garrison expecting something. You notice the fields. This is the farmer in you, and it's worth more than any weapon. You can look at a district's paddies in the wrong month and know that men were pulled off the land for something, and roughly how many, and roughly when. Empty rice drying racks in autumn tell you a lord is stripping his own province. Too few young men in a village tells you where they went. A dyer's yard with no cloth hanging tells you the merchants have stopped coming. You reach the castle town on the fifth evening, and you do not go near the castle. You find lodging at the cheap end of town. You buy something. You complain about the price, and about the weather, and about your feet, and in doing so, you become a man who is here about a small, dull errand and is not enjoying it. Over the next several days, you will drink very little and listen enormously. And now the real work begins, which is waiting. Nobody tells you about the waiting. Here is what it consists of. You establish a place from which you can see something worth seeing: a gate, a road, a stretch of wall, a warehouse yard, and a reason to be there. Perhaps you take casual work. There is always casual work, and a man carrying sacks is furniture. Perhaps you simply become a fixture, the fellow who sits on that step in the mornings. Perhaps, if there's no other option, you find a position outside the town entirely, in a stand of trees or a fold of ground, and you lie in it. And then you watch for hours, and almost nothing happens. This is the true texture of your profession, not action. Attention sustained past the point where it hurts. Your legs go numb, and you cannot shift to fix it. Insects find you, and you cannot swat them. You become viciously, unreasonably thirsty. The cold gets into you slowly from the ground, which is how cold really works, rising rather than falling. And the mind is the worst of it. The mind is not built for 6 hours of nothing. It wanders off to old arguments and imagined conversations and a fence at home that needs mending, and each time it goes, you have to bring it back, because the one thing you're here for might take 11 seconds and might happen at any moment. And if you're thinking about the fence when it does, you have wasted a month. Endurance is the meaning that sits inside your name, not stealth. Endurance. The manuals will make it explicit. Patience is the first discipline, before anything to do with walls or locks or blades. Later readers will skim past that line, looking for the interesting parts, which is how you can tell they've never done it. What you're actually counting over those days is mundane to the point of absurdity. Men in and out of the gate by hour, whether the guard changes at fixed times, and how long the changeover takes, and whether anyone is genuinely watching during it, how many horses, what comes in on carts, and crucially, what quantity, because an army moves on its stores, and stores can be counted, whether the outer wall has been repaired, and where the new timber is, because new timber marks the section they were worried about, whether the well is inside the walls or outside, how many roofs are thatch and how many are tile. That last one matters more than anything, and you note it precisely, and will come back to why. You count the smoke at dawn, which gives you households. You count the washing, which gives you people. You count the rice bales going into the castle store, which gives you how long they could hold out, and that single number may be worth more to your employer than everything else combined. You commit it to memory in an organized way, because a jumble of facts is worthless. Then, alone, you write in a private shorthand that would mean nothing to anyone else, some of it in a code your family uses, some of it just abbreviations that only make sense to you. 9 days you're in that town, 9 days of ordinariness, of nodding to the same woman at the same well, of eating the same bad food, of watching a gate. On the 10th day, the thing you came for happens. A body of men rides in from the north, and you count them, and you note their banners, and you see how they're equipped, and how tired the horses are, and you know from the direction and the timing what it means. It takes about a minute and a half. Then you finish your bowl and pay and grumble about your feet and walk out of town on the western road like a man going home from a tedious errand, which in every way that matters is exactly what you are. The walk home takes 6 days because you go a different way than you came. You always do. A face that appears twice on the same road is a face that gets noticed the second time. And on the road home, you turn the whole thing over, arranging it, deciding what matters. Because a report is not a list. A report is an argument, and the man who commissioned it is going to make expensive decisions on the strength of it. And if you hand him raw noise, he will either misuse it or stop hiring you. So you shape it. Here is what I saw. Here is how confident I am about each part. This I watched myself for 9 days. This I was told by a man in a tea house who had reason to know and no reason to lie. This is my inference, and I want you to treat it as mine. That last distinction is the mark of a professional. An amateur reports rumor as fact because it makes his month sound more valuable. A professional labels his guesses and is trusted for decades. And this is the thing that the whole legend gets backwards. You are not paid for violence. You are paid for accuracy. Before we go further into the business of it, I'd love to know how you're doing tonight. If you're still with me, drop a single word in the comments. Whatever the weather is doing where you are, rain, fog, snow, clear. It's a small thing, but I like knowing what the sky looks like in all the places this reaches. Now, let's talk about who's paying and what for. The men who hire you are warlords or their senior officers, and they are engaged in an extremely expensive activity. Moving an army is ruinous. Feeding it is worse. A siege can consume a province's entire surplus and end in nothing. And the single most common way to waste all of that is to be wrong about something, to besiege a castle that turns out to have 3 years of rice in it, to march into a valley expecting 2,000 men and meet five, to trust an ally who has already been talked to by someone else. Against that, your fee is nothing: a handful of silver, a few bales of rice, an arrangement about your valley's obligations. It's the cheapest insurance in the country. So, what they buy is this: how many men, really? Not the number the enemy is announcing, the real one. How much food, and therefore how long. Where the water comes from. Who inside the walls is unhappy, and unhappy enough. Whether the reinforcement everyone expects from the north is actually coming, or whether that lord has quietly decided to sit this one out. Where the ground is soft, which gate is old, and always whether the roofs are thatch. There's your answer to the thing you counted so carefully. A castle town of thatch in a dry season with a wind off the hills is a completely different military problem than one of tile. Your employer isn't asking out of curiosity. It's the sort of knowledge that decides a campaign before it starts, and the sort you can only get by standing in a place for 9 days looking upward like an idiot. The delivery is done in person, and it's brief, and it's oral with your notes as a prompt. You don't leave documents. Documents are a hostage. Then you're paid and thanked in a manner that is polite and distant, and you go home, because you should understand the shape of the relationship. You are useful. You are not respected. This is one of the genuinely hard parts of your life, and it doesn't fit the legend at all, because the legend imagines you as feared. You are not feared. You are held slightly at arm's length, the way people hold a person whose trade they need and would rather not think about too closely. The warrior class your employers belong to has spent centuries building an ideology in which their own violence is honorable, face to face, announced in daylight, with your name shouted first. That ideology has never entirely matched their behavior. Ambush and deception are as old as warfare, and Japanese warfare is no exception. But it's the story they tell about themselves, and you are the living embarrassment to it. You do the necessary thing that the code cannot admit, so they use you and pay you and prefer you use the side entrance. Occasionally, the contempt is explicit. There are men who will not eat with you. There are commanders who will take your report and then make a small remark to the room afterwards, and the room will laugh, and you will keep your face entirely still, because that's a skill too. And there is the harder truth beneath it: you are disposable in a specific and quiet way. A samurai who fails is a problem to be managed. He has a family, a lord, a name that has to be dealt with. A hired man from a mountain valley who fails and is caught is simply denied. Nobody sent him. Nobody knows him. Whatever happens next happens to a man who officially doesn't exist. You know this. Everyone in your valley knows it. It's factored into the price, and into how carefully you work, and into the rule that you never carry anything on your person that names your employer. But hold two things at once here, because both are true. The other thing is that you are, in a strange way, freer than the men who look past you at dinner. The samurai in that room cannot choose. His loyalty was decided before he was born. If his lord picks a losing war, he goes to it. If his lord orders something appalling, he does it, or he dies, and quite possibly both. His life is a set of obligations he inherited and cannot resign from. You were asked. A man came up your road and made a proposal, and you could have said no, and men in your valley did say no to jobs that were badly conceived, or in country they didn't know, or for employers with a reputation for not paying. You negotiated. You set a price. You'll go home afterwards to your own land, in your own valley, governed by a council that includes your family, and no one will tell you what to plant. You are looked down on by men who have less freedom than you do. It's a peculiar comfort. But on a cold road, 6 days from home, with silver in your belt and nobody's banner on your back, it's a real one. There's a part of your household that the legends turned into something sinister, and it deserves rescuing because it's one of the most genuinely admirable things about your valley. Your family makes medicine, not as a sideline, as a serious and closely held body of knowledge, handed down carefully, written into the family papers, guarded the way another family might guard a metalworking technique. Your grandmother knew it. Your mother knows it. Your wife knows it better than you do, and it's her hands that grind and steep and portion. The reason is entirely practical. Your trade takes men far from home for weeks, in bad weather, sleeping on the ground, drinking from streams, eating what they can get. The commonest ways to die in your profession have nothing to do with anyone catching you. They are a wound that goes bad, a fever, a chest that fills in winter, and the violent illnesses that come from foul water. All four are survivable if treated early and murderous if not, and there will be no one out there to treat you. So you carry your own. And the preparations you carry are the accumulated trial and error of generations of a mountain community that had every reason to get good at it. The mountains around your valley are, from a herbalist's view, generous. There's mugwort, which is everywhere and used for more things than you can list. There's a knotweed root, dried and ground, used against the sort of stomach illness that kills small children. There are barks that reduce a fever. There are resins and pastes for a wound, and charcoal and rice paste dressings. There are teas that quiet a cough enough to let a man sleep, which matters not only medically but professionally, because a cough is a location, and a man who cannot stop coughing cannot work. There's a whole small science of tiredness, preparations to take when you have been awake too long and need to be reliable for a few hours more. Some of it is ginseng, which is expensive and traded and worth it. Some is more ordinary. All of it is the pharmacology of people who cannot afford to be unwell at the wrong moment. The gathering is seasonal, and it's family work. Certain roots in autumn after the tops die back, certain barks in spring, drying racks under the eaves, everything labeled, everything dated, because a remedy that has sat 3 years is not the remedy you think you're taking. And this knowledge outlives the trade completely. When the wars end and nobody needs a man who can count a garrison, the families of your valley and of Kōka find that they are sitting on something valuable that the peace hasn't touched. Traveling medicine sellers from these districts become a familiar sight across Japan, men walking with a lacquered box on their back, leaving a packet of remedies with a household and collecting for whatever was used on the next circuit, an arrangement built entirely on trust and repetition. It's a good ending for a body of knowledge. The information gathering died with the wars. The medicine walked out of the valley and kept working for centuries. Now, the other thing, the one people always ask about. Yes, your world contains poisons. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise, and the manuals of your trade are not squeamish. Certain mountain plants are lethal, and everyone in a rural community knows which ones, because children have to be taught not to touch them, and livestock have to be kept off them. The knowledge is not secret, it's agricultural, but I'm going to leave it there, and not out of delicacy about your century, partly because it doesn't need detail to make the point, and partly because the honest historical picture is far less lurid than the legend. The overwhelming majority of the work of your profession involved nothing of the kind, and the manuals spend vastly more space on how to talk to a gatekeeper than on anything you could put in a cup. A poisoning is a very poor tool for a man who wants to be paid again. It leaves a body, and a body starts an investigation, and an investigation is the precise opposite of your entire professional purpose. What your valley was genuinely, historically famous for is the opposite trade, for keeping people alive. That's the part worth remembering, and it's the part the stories almost entirely forgot in favor of the other. There's a wooden chest in the corner of your house, and it doesn't lock, and inside it are small paper packets in rows, each folded closed in the same particular way, each marked in your wife's hand: fever, stomach, wound, cough, sleep. When you go out, 4 or 5 of those packets go into your bag, and the choice of which is made after a short conversation about where you're going and what the weather has been doing there. It is, when you look at it plainly, an act of care disguised as a professional supply. Most of your life is like that, if you look at it plainly. Not every job is 9 days on a step, counting roofs. Some of them are the other thing. It's a night in the 11th month, 2 years on. The rice is in. The air has that hard clarity that comes after the first proper cold, and the moon is a few days off full, which is worse than useless, and which is why you've argued about the date. That's the first lesson of the hidden way, and it surprises people. Your enemy is not darkness. Your enemy is light, and the most dangerous light in your world is a bright moon on a clear night, which turns a courtyard into something almost readable and prints your shadow across it in hard-edged black. What you want is a cloud. What you want, ideally, is the second half of a wet night, when the rain has soaked into everything, and the ground has stopped crunching, and the sentries have retreated to the lee of a wall and pulled their collars up. Rain is the finest ally your profession has ever had. It muffles, it blinds, it depresses, and it gives every man on guard duty an excellent reason to be looking at his own feet. Tonight you have a compromise: high thin cloud, some wind, and a wind is worth a great deal because it puts motion into everything. A world where the bamboo is moving and the shutters are knocking and the trees are working is a world where one more small movement is nothing at all. On a still night, movement is the only thing there is. You've spent 9 days preparing this, most of it in daylight, most of it in ordinary clothes. You've walked past the place 4 times at different hours. You know where the dog is kept and roughly when it's fed, because a fed dog is a sleeping dog, and everything about dogs is timing. You know that the eastern side backs onto a slope of trees, which means an approach and cover. You know the guard walks the front and does not walk the back, because walking the back involves wet feet. You are dressed in the darkest thing you own, which is deep indigo, and you have rubbed your face and hands with soot and grease, because skin is the brightest thing on a person at night, and hands more than face. Hands move. You go in at the hour before the guard changes, when the men on duty have been on duty long enough to be stupid, and the actual doing of it is almost entirely a matter of slowness. That's the thing nobody films, because you can't film it. It is desperately, agonizingly slow. You move a body length and stop, not because there's a rule about it, but because a shape that appears and holds still becomes a bush, a post, part of the wall, and the human eye that half caught it will settle and reassure itself and move on. The eye is looking for motion. Deny it motion, and it will argue you out of existence on your behalf. You do not hold your breath. Held breath ends in a gasp, and a gasp is a sound in a place with no sounds. You breathe through your mouth, slowly, because a nose is noisier than people realize. Where you put your feet is the whole art. Outside edge first, then roll the weight inward, then let the weight down through the leg rather than dropping onto it. It's not mystical. It's the same thing a hunter does. It's the same thing you do at home, crossing a room where a child has finally gone to sleep. And if you've ever done that, you already know the technique, and you already know that it takes 4 times as long as walking and leaves your thighs burning. The wall is a low earthwork with a wooden palisade, and you don't go over the middle of it. You go over at the corner, where 2 runs meet, and there's a post to take your weight quietly, and where the sight line from the front is broken. Inside, everything changes, and you slow down further. Inside is where the mistakes live, the bucket you didn't know about. The gravel path, gravel is deliberate. Gravel is a warning system, and you cross gravel by going around it or not at all. The floorboards of a corridor, which in a wooden building will talk to you, and which you cross at the very edge where the boards meet their supports and have the least give, and the paper doors. Your country's interior walls are wood frames and paper, and this cuts both ways magnificently. Paper is nothing. It doesn't block sound, so a room full of sleeping men is audible from the corridor, and you can count breathing. But paper is also a screen, and a lamp behind a screen turns anything in front of it into a hard black silhouette. So you learn to think about where the light in a building is, always, and to stay off the lit side of paper the way you'd stay out of a river. You find what you came for. Tonight, it's not a person, it's a room, and in the room is a box, and in the box are papers, and you don't take them. Taking them announces everything. You read them by the smallest possible light, in the smallest possible time, and you put them back in the order you found them, and you leave the room exactly as it was. That's the professional standard, and it's the true measure of the trade, not that you got in, that nobody ever knew you had. You're back over the wall in the last of the dark, out through the trees, on the road before the town wakes, in a wide hat being nobody. By afternoon, you're 2 provinces away, complaining about the price of tea. And then there's the other kind of night. It's a different year, a different province, and it goes wrong in the most ordinary way possible. Someone who should have been asleep isn't. There's no dramatic discovery, no dropped weapon, no clumsy step. A man simply gets up in the middle of the night for the same reason Men get up in the middle of the night in every century, and he comes out into a corridor that is supposed to be empty, and it isn't. There's a pause, a whole second, maybe two, in which he is trying to make sense of a shape, and you are watching him try. Then he shouts, "Now, here is where every story you've ever been told takes a turn, and here is where you're going to take a different one." In the story, the ninja fights. He moves like water, and the guards fall in sequence, and he leaves by the roof. In life, you run immediately, without hesitation, without a moment's consideration of anything else, and without the faintest trace of shame, because running is not a failure of nerve in your profession. It is the correct execution of the plan. It is what the plan was for. The manuals of your trade are explicit about this in a way that startles modern readers. They spend far more effort on getting out than on getting in. There are pages on escape, on decoys, on what to throw and where, on how to break a pursuit, on where to hide and for how long, on the discipline of the wait afterwards. And running through all of it is one plain principle. Your objective is the information and your life. A fight risks both to protect neither. Because think about what a fight actually is. For you, you have no armor. You are carrying a short blade at most. There are, you know exactly how many, you counted for a week, between 9 and 14 armed men inside these walls, several of whom have been fighting since childhood, all of whom know this building better than you do, and every one of whom is about to be awake. You are alone, and there is no such thing as reinforcement, and even winning is losing. A guard hurt or worse is a shout the whole province hears. It transforms a night when nothing happened into an incident, an investigation, a description, a hunt. The single most valuable outcome, that nobody knows there was ever a shinobi here, is already gone the moment he shouted, but there's a vast difference between a household that half thinks it had a burglar and a household that certainly had an infiltrator. So and you go along the route you decided on 8 hours ago in daylight, because the one thing you must never do is improvise and escape while frightened. Fear does something specific and terrible to a person. It makes you run toward openness, toward the big obvious gap, the open ground, the road. Every instinct in your body screams for space, and every one of those instincts is wrong, because open ground is where a man with a bow solves you at leisure. You go the ugly way, through the thorns, along the drainage ditch, which is filthy and freezing, and which nobody wants to follow you into. Over the low wall at the bad corner, the one that's awkward to climb, which is exactly why nobody is standing at it. You do throw something at some point, not a weapon, just a stone, hard, into the bamboo on the far side of the yard, because a noise over there buys you 4 seconds over here. That is the entire tactical philosophy of your trade, condensed into one motion. Don't beat them, move their attention, and be somewhere else while it's moving. And then you're out and into the trees. And here comes the hardest part of the whole night. You stop. Everything in you wants to keep running for hours until the fear is used up. And that is precisely what they will expect and how they will find you. A man running through unfamiliar country in the dark, making noise, tiring, leaving a line of disturbance a child could follow at first light. So you get into cover and you make yourself very small, and you stay there, and you let the search go past you. It's the worst hour of your life. You can hear them, voices some way off, then closer, then a lantern swinging and throwing its light around in a way that makes every shadow lurch. Your heart is going so hard, you're convinced it's audible. You're soaked from the ditch, and the cold is coming into you fast, and you cannot move, and you cannot shiver, and you have to lie in the wet and let your body get colder for as long as it takes. But here is the thing you know that they don't. A search at night is theater. Men with lanterns cannot see past their own light. They are noisy, and they want to find nothing, and they want to go back to bed, and by the second hour they are walking loudly through places they have already walked, so that the officer can hear them being thorough. You wait them out. You wait past the point when you're sure they've gone, and then you wait longer, because the oldest trick in your world is the search that pretends to end. And near dawn, stiff and filthy and shaking, you get up and you walk, not toward home, but sideways to somewhere that isn't a road, and you sleep badly in the day, and you begin the very long, very boring business of getting out of the province like a man of no consequence. You get home 11 days later. You did not kill anyone. You did not fight anyone. You brought back most of what you went for, and you told your employer honestly which parts you'd missed and why. And he was annoyed, and he paid you, and he used you again. And that, unglamorously, is a successful night in the real trade. The men who wrote the manuals would have understood exactly. They'd have asked one question only, and it isn't the one the films would ask. Not, did you win? Did you come home? Let's go back to the valley, and to the house, and to the people who were in it the whole time you were gone, because there's a version of this history in which the household is a blank, a place the hero departs from and returns to. And that version is nonsense, because the household is the thing that makes the trade possible at all. Consider the arithmetic. You've been away 11 days on this trip, and 40 on the last one, and there was a month in spring, and there will be more. During every one of those absences, a farm still has to run, water still has to be managed, animals fed, a field weeded on schedule or lost, obligations to the valley met on the day they fall due, not whenever you happen to be back, children fed and taught and kept out of the stream. Your wife runs all of it, not as a stand in, as the actual manager of the household economy, which is how rural Japanese families largely worked anyway, and which in a family like yours is simply more so. She knows what's in the stores to the bale. She knows what's owed and to whom. She deals with the neighbors, and with the neighbors' grievances, and with the small, constant diplomacy of a valley where every family has been quietly annoyed with every other family since the 14th century. When a representative comes round about a levy or a labor obligation, she deals with him, and he expects to deal with her. She also knows exactly what you do. This is worth being clear about, because the fiction loves a secret. There is no secret. In a valley where a substantial share of families are in the same trade, where the skills are taught within families, where the contracts are negotiated through people everyone knows, the idea of a shinobi hiding his profession from his own wife is faintly ridiculous. She knows. Her father may have done it. Her brothers may do it. She has probably prepared the medicines that are keeping other men alive on other roads right now. What she doesn't know is the details of a given job, and she doesn't ask. There's a whole grammar to this, unwritten and precise. She knows roughly which direction, roughly how long, and whether it's the kind that's dangerous or the kind that's merely tedious. She knows what to say if someone asks, a version involving a relative, or a purchase, or a debt, dull and complete and unvarying. She's better at it than you are, and there's a household rule about the return, which exists in many forms in many families. When he comes back, nothing is asked for the first day. He eats, he sleeps, he sits by the fire. If he wants to say something, he will. If he doesn't, the day passes, and the next day he's simply a farmer again, and the subject is closed. It's not romantic. It's not cold either. It's a working arrangement between two people who both understand that some things are better not carried into the room, and it's probably wiser than most of what's been written about marriage since. Now, the question everyone asks, were there women in the trade? This is one of the places where the honest historical answer is smaller and more interesting than the legend. So let's take the legend apart first. The popular image is the female assassin, beautiful, deadly, seducing a lord and killing him in his chamber, trained from childhood in a secret art. That image is a modern creation. It comes largely from 20th century fiction, and it is enormously popular, and there is essentially no contemporary evidence for it whatsoever. What the historical record does contain is a technique described in the old manuals, which is a genuinely different thing: the use of women to obtain information from inside a household. And when you look at what that actually describes, it's not an assassin, it's a placement. A woman enters a household in an ordinary capacity: a servant, a nurse, a seamstress, a helper taken on for a season, and she stays, and she works, and she listens. And she is, in the specific circumstances, better positioned than any man could ever be. Think about where information actually lives in a great household, not on the walls. In the domestic interior, which men from outside cannot enter, and in which women are constantly present and functionally invisible. The women of the household talk in front of servants. They discuss a marriage negotiation, which is a political treaty. They discuss which lord's messenger came and how the lady of the house was afterwards. They discuss whether the master is ill and how ill, which may be the single most valuable fact in the province. They complain about money, which tells you about money. A servant woman who is good at her job, who is pleasant and useful and unmemorable, can sit in that room for a year, and no one will ever regard her as a person who might carry information out of it. It's the same principle as everything else in your trade. Occupy an expected role so completely that observation becomes impossible, applied by someone with access no man could buy. Is it dangerous? Yes, differently. It's slow and it's lonely, and it requires living a life inside someone else's house for months at a time. Is it seduction and murder? No. Those things get people killed and produce nothing. We know frustratingly little about the women who actually did this, a technique described in a manual, some later traditions, names that may or may not be reliable. They were extremely good at not being recorded, which was rather the point, and history is not generous to people whose profession was to leave no impression. But it's worth sitting with the shape of it. In a century that gave women very little formal power, there existed a category of work where being underestimated was the entire qualification, where the assumption that you were not worth noticing was not an insult, but an operational advantage, and one that a clever woman could turn into a wage and a role and a form of standing in her own valley. That's not the legend. It's better than the legend. So, who's in charge of you? The popular answer is a pyramid, a shadowy grandmaster at the top who never leaves his mountain, middlemen beneath him who handle contracts, and foot operatives at the bottom who do the work and are told nothing. Three neat tiers, with the mystical implication that the man at the top knows everything. There is a real basis for this. The three tiers appear in the written tradition of your trade, in manuals compiled long after your lifetime, and they describe something recognizable, someone who takes the contract and carries the reputation, someone who organizes and leads, someone who goes. But be careful with it, because a tidy diagram written down a century later is a description of how a system looked to a man arranging it on paper, and paper always looks tidier than the thing. What it's actually like from inside is more like a trade guild crossed with an extended family. The unit that matters is the family. Skills are taught within families, from father to son and mother to daughter, along with the medicine recipes and the codes and the private shorthand. Some families are more prominent than others, bigger holdings, better reputations, longer track records, more contacts among the warlords. Those families take the important contracts, and when a job needs 8 men, they pull them from their relations and their neighbors and the families they've intermarried with for 2 centuries. So the man who leads your job tonight might be your cousin and might also be a man you'll argue with about a boundary stone in the spring, and might also be someone who owes your father money. That's the reality behind the pyramid. Everyone knows everyone. Everyone's grandmother was somebody else's grandmother's sister. There is no oath sworn in a cave. There is no initiation with a candle. What there is a reputation within a valley of a few thousand people, and that reputation is the only enforcement mechanism there is, and it's ferocious. Because consider the problem your profession has. You send men out, alone, unsupervised, into places where they could be bought. Nobody can watch them. A man who takes your employer's money and then quietly takes more money from the other side to report something false is nearly impossible to detect and can destroy a family's business permanently. The answer isn't oaths, it's that he has to come home to a valley where his failure is known within a week, where his brother marries into a family that will not forget it, where his children will be looked at differently at the harvest, and where nobody will ever hire anyone from that house again. In a small, dense, permanent community, reputation isn't a nice idea. It's the whole structure. The training then is not a school, it's childhood. You were carried out to the paddies before you could walk and left at the edge while the adults worked, and you learned the valley the way a child learns a house. By 6, you knew every path, ditch, and stand of trees between your home and 3 villages. By 8, you could move through a wood without being heard by an adult, because that was a game everyone played, and losing was humiliating. You learned to swim in the river properly, because a man in your family who can't cross water is useless. You learned to climb the way farm children climb, which is casually and constantly. You learned rope until your hands knew knots without consulting you, because you made rope every winter of your life. Then older, the deliberate parts, walking at night, reading weather, carrying a load a very long way, and arriving able to work, sitting still, and this was drilled, and it was hated, and it was the most important thing. An uncle who put you on a hillside at dusk and told you to report what changed, and came back at midnight and asked, and was unimpressed. Some of it was odd and specific and would look like nonsense written down, learning the hours by the stars and by the shifting of an animal's eye in the light, learning what different soils do to sound, learning how to tell whether a house is truly asleep, which is a matter of the quality of the quiet. And a great deal of it was talking, how to open a conversation with a stranger so that he does the talking, how to ask a question that doesn't feel like one, how to be liked immediately and forgotten within the hour. If your trade had a curriculum, half of it was social, and the pay better than farming, not transformative. A job might bring silver or rice or a favorable arrangement about your valley's obligations. Prominent families with reputations negotiated well. A young man on his third job did not. Nobody in your valley got rich. Iga is not full of grand houses, and the archaeology shows exactly what you'd expect. Hundreds of modest fortified farmsteads, all of a similar size, none of them a palace. What the money did was smooth the years. A bad harvest is survivable if there's silver. A daughter's marriage can be done properly. A roof can be replaced before it fails rather than after. That's the honest scale of it. This was not a route to power. It was a supplementary income that let a mountain valley of ordinary farming families live slightly better and slightly more independently than they otherwise would have in a century that was busy grinding such families into other men's armies, which, when you put it that way, might be the most impressive thing about it. The valley's arrangement worked for a very long time, long enough that the people living in it could be forgiven for thinking it was permanent. But the arrangement depended on one thing, and it was never a thing your valley controlled. It depended on Japan staying broken. The whole logic of your life sits on that foundation. Nobody conquered Iga because nobody had the reach to spare. Your families stayed independent because the men with armies were busy with each other. Your trade existed because there were dozens of competing lords who all needed to know what the others were doing and who would pay outsiders to find out. And in the second half of the 16th century, that begins to change. One warlord after another is absorbed, and the map, which for generations has been a mosaic of small colors, starts resolving into a few large ones. The wars stop being between neighbors and start being between coalitions. Armies get bigger. Firearms arrive and change what a wall is for. And the men at the top begin for the first time in centuries to think in terms of a whole country rather than a province. A place like Iga is a very different proposition to a man like that. Not a poor return on a difficult march anymore. Now it's a hole in the map, an anomaly, a district in the middle of the country that answers to nobody, sitting across roads that matter, governing itself by committee. The pressure comes, as these things do, gradually, and then not gradually. The first attempt to take the valley fails. That's worth saying clearly because it is genuinely remarkable. An outside force comes over the mountains, and the League does exactly what the League was written to do. The families turn out. The signal fires are lit. The men who have spent their lives learning this ground fight on it, at night, in the fog, in narrow places of their own choosing, against an army that does not know which path goes where, and they win. A district of farmers with no lord defeats a professional force, and for a short while afterwards, the valley is more certain of itself than it has ever been. The second attempt is different. It comes with overwhelming numbers, from several directions at once, methodically, by a commander who has already learned the lesson of the first. And the outcome is not in doubt from the beginning. I'm not going to take you through it. It was terrible, and the details are recorded, and I don't think you need them to fall asleep. What matters for our purposes is what it meant. The independence of the valley ended permanently in the space of a few weeks. The league that had governed for generations stopped existing. Many families were destroyed, many others scattered over the mountains into neighboring provinces, into the great cities, into the service of whoever would take them. The survivors carried the skill with them because it was the only portable thing they owned. And here the story turns in a way that nobody at the time could have predicted. A year or so later, one of the most powerful men in the country is caught in the open with almost no escort, hundreds of miles from safety, when a coup destroys his ally overnight. He is in hostile territory. Every road is dangerous. If he is taken, everything he has built ends that week. The fastest route home runs directly through the mountains of Iga, through the valley that had just been broken, past the villages of scattered families, with every reason on earth to hate the men who had done it, and who are, crucially, not the men now asking for passage. They guide him through, men who know every path and stream and ridge in that country move him across it quietly and hand him on, and he comes out the other side alive. It's one of the great narrow escapes in Japanese history, and the man who survived it goes on to unify the country and found a dynasty that will rule for 2.5 centuries. He does not forget. The Iga men and their commanders, a family who had produced generations of these fighters and whose head was, contrary to every later legend, a conventional spear-carrying officer rather than a masked assassin, enter his service formally. Hundreds of them, given positions, given stipends, given a place. They are moved eventually to the new capital in the east and settled in a district beside the great castle and given a job. They guard a gate. Sit with that for a second, because the whole arc of your profession is contained in it. A valley of independent farmer spies is broken by the unification of the country, scattered, and then absorbed into the very structure that destroyed it, and given, as their reward, the most stable and unglamorous employment imaginable. A gate on the western side of a castle, watched around the clock by men whose grandfathers had spent their lives making sure nobody knew where they were. The gate still carries their commander's name. It's on maps in Tokyo today, and millions of people pass through that part of the city, and a great many of them have no idea that the name belongs to a real officer, or that a district of the city was once full of families from a mountain valley 300 miles away who had been brought there because they were extremely good at something nobody needed anymore. Because that's the thing about the peace that follows. It's real, it lasts, and it has no use whatsoever for what you know how to do. 2.5 centuries of peace. It's one of the most extraordinary things any country has ever managed, and by almost every measure, it is good. The roads are safe, villages are not burned, the cities grow enormous and fill with theaters and bookshops and restaurants and printmakers. Ordinary people live longer and better than their great grandparents could have imagined. And for a profession built entirely on the needs of warring lords, it is an extinction event in slow motion. There is no war to gather information about. There are no rival warlords bidding for a man who can count a garrison, because the garrisons all belong to the same government now. The single skill your valley spent 200 years perfecting has, in the space of a generation, no market at all. So, what happens to the men? Some of them keep the job in name. The gate guards continue for generations. The descendants of Iga families in the eastern capital, drawing a stipend, standing watch, filing reports about who came and went. It is honest work, and it is desperately dull. The stipends, as set long ago, do not keep pace with the cost of living in a booming city, and over the decades, the position becomes genuinely hard. Hereditary employment at a fixed wage in a place where prices rise. There survive complaints, petitions, formal grievances about pay, and conditions submitted by men whose ancestors had been the most feared irregulars in Japan. That's not a heroic ending, but it's an honest one, and it's the ending most working people in most centuries get. The job outlives the reason for the job, and the people in it keep showing up. Some are given other work. There are men from these families employed as inspectors and observers, quiet officials whose task is to keep an eye on distant domains and report if a lord is behaving oddly. The trade doesn't vanish so much as get absorbed into an ordinary civil service, which is what happens to nearly everything eventually. Some become gardeners at the castle. This is a detail I find almost unbearably good. Men from families whose entire body of knowledge concerned moving unnoticed through a lord's grounds are given permanent positions maintaining a lord's grounds, present every day, everywhere, entirely unremarkable, seeing everything. Whether that was quiet policy or simply what work was available is a question you can turn over for a while. And many, many of them go home to the valleys and become what they always mostly were, which is farmers. The paddies are still there. The mountains are still there. The fog still fills the basin in autumn. The families still hold their modest fortified farmsteads, and the earthworks slowly soften under bamboo, and the children are still taught the medicine recipes even after the reason for the medicine has faded. The medicine, as we said, walks out into the country and thrives. Generations of peddlers from these districts carry lacquered boxes on their backs along the roads of a peaceful Japan, leaving remedies with households and settling up next time round. It is the last commercially successful branch of the whole tradition, and it is entirely about keeping people well. And then, roughly a century after the wars ended, something happens that we should all be grateful for. A man from one of these families sits down with paper and an inkstone and decides to write it all down. He is not writing a manual for practitioners. There are barely any left. He is not writing to impress anyone. He is a man from a district with a long tradition, watching that tradition thin out in real time. The last people who did the work getting old, the knowledge living only in the memories of families who no longer have any reason to use it. And he does the thing that people do when they can feel something slipping. He collects it: family traditions, techniques, principles, lore, the accumulated practice of both valleys, gathered from whatever sources he can reach and organized into a great compendium. It's an enormous work and a strange one to read. There are the practical chapters you'd expect: infiltration, disguise, the open way and the hidden way, tools, weather, moon phases, escape. There's astonishing detail about ordinary things: how to talk to people, how to judge a man's character, how to manage a subordinate, how to know when a plan is bad. And there are long passages that have nothing to do with technique at all. Passages about correctness, about why this work must serve a legitimate purpose, and why a man who uses these skills for his own gain is not a practitioner of the art, but a criminal with a skill set. About the moral weight of deception and the difference between deceiving an enemy in service of ending a war sooner and deceiving people because it is convenient. You can read that as self-justification if you want. I don't think it is. I think it is a man in a peaceful century with time to reflect, trying to set down what he believed his ancestors' trade had been for, so that when nobody remembered any more, it would not be remembered wrongly. He was not entirely successful. Within another century or so, the popular imagination had comprehensively replaced the reality with something far more exciting: stagehands' costumes, magic, throwing stars, and a superhuman warrior who never existed. But the book survived. Copies were made. It sat in collections for generations, and eventually historians opened it, and archaeologists went into the valleys and counted the earthworks, and the documents of the leagues were read again, and slowly, patiently, the real people came back into focus. Which means that the tradition ends in almost exactly the way it operated, not with a battle, with a man quietly gathering information, organizing it carefully, and making sure it got where it needed to go. So let's go back to the valley one last time. It's evening now in the middle of the 16th century. The work is done. The fog is coming down off the ridges the way it does, filling the basin slowly until the lights of the next farmstead go soft and then go out entirely, and the world shrinks to the size of one house. Inside, there's a fire in the floor and a pot over it. There are children arguing about something that doesn't matter. There's a chest in the corner with paper packets in rows, folded closed in a particular way, each one marked in a careful hand. There's a wide woven hat hanging by the door, and a coil of rope, and a bag that weighs almost nothing. And there's a man sitting by the fire who will be remembered 400 years from now by more people than have ever known the name of any warlord he worked for, remembered completely wrongly, in a costume he never wore, doing things he never did, in a world that would have baffled him. He was a farmer. He grew rice in a mountain basin and made rope in the winter and worried about water rights and about whether the stores would last until spring. He belonged to a valley that governed itself by argument and agreement in a century when almost nowhere did. And a few times a year, He walked a very long way and stood very still and looked carefully at ordinary things, at wood piles and washing and the height of a granary and whether the roofs were thatch or tile, and came home and told the truth about what he'd seen. That's it. That's the whole trade. No magic, no mask, no spinning stars in the dark. Just an extraordinary amount of walking, an almost inhuman amount of patience, a bag containing a hat and a rope and a pencil and some medicine, and a professional standard so high that the perfect job left no evidence that anyone had ever been there at all. There's something in that worth carrying with you into sleep, I think. The people who were genuinely best at this were never the ones anyone told stories about. Their success was measured in silence, in the absence of an incident, in a household that never knew, in a night that was, as far as anyone could ever tell, completely uneventful. Their entire professional achievement was invisibility, and they were proud of it, and they were right to be. Almost all of history is like that, if you look. Not the loud parts, the people who did difficult things carefully and went home and were never written about, the ones who kept the household running while someone was away, who made the medicine, who walked the road, who sat on a hillside at dusk and paid attention when nothing was happening, over and over, for years. They didn't get the legend. Somebody in a black costume got the legend, but they got the life. And when you strip away everything that was invented about them, what's left is a valley full of ordinary families who were unusually good at something, unusually free for their century, and unusually clear eyed about what they were and were not willing to do. The fog has closed over the basin completely now. The mountains are gone, the paddies are gone. There's nothing out there but gray and quiet, and the sound of water finding its way down through the channels toward the fields. Let it settle over you the same way. Let the day go. Let the valley keep its secrets the way it always did, and let yourself sink down under the weight of the dark and the warmth and all that patient, unremarkable, remarkable silence. Nothing is going to happen tonight. That was always the point. Rest easy. Sleep well. This is drowsy history.